All right. Hello, we're live. My name is Melanie Dizon. I'm the Director of Education and Content at the Davis Phinney Foundation, and I'm here with Amy and Julia. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah,
Thank
doing
you.
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm excited. Really looking forward to this conversation. Amy, can you, for the people who don't know you in our community, most people do, but can you let us know who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I was diagnosed at age 48, which was about 7.5 years ago. At the time, I was married. My two daughters were in middle school, and I was working as a legal writing professor full time and with a sort of a law practice on the side. I was very busy. The diagnosis came like everybody's came, just all the weird stuff. The pinky that got really stiff, the walking that got really weird. And there was about a year of that and a lot of denial and magical thinking. And then I was diagnosed in June of 2015. So fast forward, it's 7.5 years later. I'm still working full time. My two daughters are in college. I'm still married. And life is good. It's hard, but I think everybody's life is hard. So all is well.
All right. Julia, we've had the occasion to work together before. So can you tell people, maybe what you were doing when we met and what you're doing now?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm so glad to be back in Phinney land. So I was an ambassador for many years for the Phinney Foundation and still, refer guys for your resources so often. So back in the day when I was an ambassador with Phinney and when I first met Amy, I was an occupational therapist at the University of Pennsylvania's Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center of Excellence. And so I was there starting in 2013, so shortly before Amy came to me, and then was an ambassador, did a lot of community engagement. I was part of the Great Resignation over the pandemic and have now moved into a role where I'm at the Lewy Body Dementia Association doing professional and community education. And so definitely a need that, I've seen out there a lot of times. It seems like when we get kind of, I think, earlier stages and I think later stages of Parkinson's, a lot of times get left in the dust. And for so long, we were all focused, I think, almost more on that middle ground. But I think everyone now is doing a lot to make sure that we're helping folks out at all different stages of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I know everyone's going to have questions about this, so let's kind of get in there about what is, so not everybody who has Parkinson's gets Lewy body dementia. Right. There's also Parkinson's disease dementia. Can you, just for people wondering, and tell them what is the difference between those two, and then what sort of connection do you know about, like, how many people with Parkinson's end up with Lewy body dementia and vice versa?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So I think that it's probably one of the more confusing nomenclatures out there, just to kind of make that, if you feel like at the end of my explanation, you're still confused, that's very normal. So basically, if you think about an umbrella, right, and that umbrella is Lewy body dementia. So underneath that umbrella, there's two types of dementia. So Parkinson's disease dementia and then dementia with Lewy bodies. What separates those two conditions is the timing of the symptoms. Now, keep in mind, I'm speaking from the perspective of the Lewy Body Dementia Association and our research centers of excellence and their experts. There are other international experts and different people who think of it as Lewy body disease, right? And more of a spectrum. And you've got Parkinson's, or you're in the PDD spectrum or the LBD or DLB spectrum. But we view it as this 1 year rule. So if you have Parkinson's disease, it's established, you've had movement symptoms for at least a year or more, and then over time, cognitive changes start to happen that lead into dementia. That's considered Parkinson's disease dementia. So you can think of it, whatever comes first, right? So the Parkinson's disease comes first, it's Parkinson's disease dementia. In the case of dementia with Lewy bodies, or DLB, the dementia occurs first. So the cognitive changes or the psychiatric changes, hallucinations, those, things that you see but aren't really there, or delusions, those fixed false beliefs, if that happens first, And then the movement changes happen over time, or for some people with DLB, they have very little movement changes. That's considered dementia with Lewy bodies. So it can be very confusing. The current estimates, there's a broad range of, it's estimated that 50 to 80% of people with Parkinson's disease will later develop dementia. I think it's important to note too, for this audience, a lot of people don't really know what dementia means. It's a very vague, fuzzy term. It's not necessarily, there's some assessment they might do that a certain score means that, but basically all the term means is a level of cognitive impairment that impacts your independence in daily activities.
Okay.
So that's it. And I think that there's a lot of work being done by some different experts in different arenas to try to change the nomenclature around some of these conditions to make it more clear, to make it easier to diagnose. But that's it in a very confusing nutshell.
Okay. Well, that's good. And it's really good to know it's sort of like the order of things. So that's one way to look at it for sure. Okay, so people might be wondering, why are Amy and Julia on this podcast together? So can you, Amy, tell me a little bit about how you found Julia and what that relationship has been?
Yeah, sure. I think if we were writing a movie, we would say that we met cute, right?
Meet cute.
When I went to see the neurologist, it was really late on a Friday afternoon in June. I was the last appointment. It was around 5 o'clock. And of course, I was by myself and I was sort of holding everything together. I was in denial, but I knew something, obviously. I didn't expect to get diagnosed with Parkinson's that day. I don't know what I did expect. I knew that it was a difficult diagnosis to make. So I thought it was going to be the beginning of a conversation. I didn't realize it was going to be the beginning and the end of that conversation in 10 minutes. So I was unprepared, as I think many people are. And I walked into the neurologist's office and there were 3 med students in there who were observing. And so I was, I felt a little bit like a zoo animal. Like everybody was just looking at me. The neurologist was giving the tests to me, but she was talking to the med students to explain what she was doing. And I wasn't really being told anything. And then after about 10 minutes, they went out in the hallway and I heard her explaining to them what they had just seen and what was going on. And then they all come, and I was just sitting there.
Oh,
yeah, it was rough. And then they all come back in. And she said, it's Parkinson's. And I could just feel these 3 sets of eyes just looking at me and looking at my response. And I was, I was trying to process that, but I also felt very self-conscious that I had all these people looking at me as I was trying to process that. I don't remember much else of what she said. I know that she said, do you want the meds? And I just was like, no, And then she said, we'll make sure you make an appointment with physical therapy and occupational therapy. Their office is on the first floor when you leave. So, and I said, okay, bye. That was it. And I know that that's pretty common from what I hear from a lot of other people, that the diagnosing neurologist isn't exactly, doesn't send you away with a lot of information that's even remotely comforting if they send you away with any information at all. So I walked out of that office. The place was empty. Everyone had gone home. All the staff had gone home. I went to the elevator and I was waiting for the elevator. And I remember saying, screw that. I'm going to take the stairs forevermore, whenever I have the option and I can, I'm going to take the stairs. So I went and I walked downstairs, and the time it took me to walk downstairs, I just was thinking my life is over. I didn't know anything about Parkinson's, but I didn't receive any information from that experience that would lead me to believe that it was going to be anything other than horrible. So, and I'm walking out on the first floor and I see the door that goes to the PT/OT area, and there was nobody there. The receptionist had gone home, but I just was sort of wandering in like a zombie. I just sort of like looked around, and just serendipitously for me, out from a corner comes this woman who I now know as Julia. I didn't know her at the time, but she was probably just preparing to go home. And as soon as I saw her, she just looked so friendly and warm and kind. And I just burst into tears because I've been holding it together for so long. And she just wrapped me in this huge hug and she said, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay."
Aw.
And it, from there, it was okay. Because from that point, I signed up for OT and PT over the course of that summer before I even had my first appointment with a Parkinson's movement disorder specialist. And I got all of the information about Parkinson's and living with it from Julia and the others in that group, the Heather and the Joellen, they're great physical therapists and occupational therapists. I spent about a month? It was like over the course of a month where Julia taught me everything that I needed to know about living well with Parkinson's. She also told me about the Davis Finney Foundation and the WPC, like everything. And if I didn't have that, if I hadn't just run into her in that moment, if I hadn't, decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator, I don't know if we would have crossed paths. But to me, it was a very serendipitous moment. And I've listened to a lot of other people talk about their day of diagnosis and how they go home and they're in like a fugue state for a month, sometimes a year or more, because they don't know what's going to happen to them. And I feel really lucky because I would have been there too, doing exactly that, but for the resources that Julia was able to provide.
Wow. So you're an angel, Julia. Like, oh my gosh, you were there at the perfect time.
By the way, I'm not the only one that says that about Julia. Pretty much everybody,
right? Everyone who knows her does.
At that time, because she no longer works there, but at that time, they're like, "Oh God, thank God for Julia." And Heather.
Right. And so, this was wasn't this at a center of excellence where you got diagnosed?
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of crazy, right?
Looking back, the neurologist who diagnosed me, she was not a Parkinson's neurologist. I'm not sure what she was doing in that space.
Yeah.
I've wondered that too. Yeah. She was not typically, she was not typically, the referral that you had for some reason was not one of our Parkinson's specialists. Typically it was a neurologist who does some Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. And so but I mean, I will say, and I say this with the utmost respect for all clinicians that I've worked with though, that I do think that there are varying levels of, how do you say, empathy with provision of the diagnosis and giving that diagnosis. I do think too, and I don't say this as an excuse in any way. There's a part of me that really questions now what that's like, because I know too, for those doctors, sometimes the struggle it is with productivity and demands and time limits and constraints and students and research, what that looks like now with COVID, because I know that all of those demands have become more and more. I know I've advocated for some time that I feel like when people are diagnosed, there should be a social worker who comes in, or a clinic coordinator, somebody. I feel like it's like a pass the baton moment. And not that I don't feel that doctors are competent in doing that. And I'm sure there are some that do an amazing job, but I think in some settings, there's not really the space carved out that you need to really be present in that moment with someone when you diagnose them. And so I think if your healthcare system is not set up for that really to be an honored moment, then I think that you need to look at, is it social work? Is it a nurse? Like, who can come and have that time? And even if it's just to give you a contact, maybe you don't really want to talk right then.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody to reach out to the next day or next week when you feel like, hey, I'm ready to ask some questions. So I still think we have a lot of work to do around this issue in a lot of places. And I can only imagine that it's gotten more difficult in the current healthcare settings.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is crazy. So, Amy, you were diagnosed and, young, active, healthy in every other way. So, somebody would say, we'll people here go to see a PT or OT, and they're like, well, I'm fine. I just ran 10 miles this morning. I don't need this. what did you learn early on about working with an OT and a PT that, sort of you bought in and you're like, this is a really important piece for my ability to live well?
I learned what my future was going to look like. And I learned, and I was given a framework for how to move and what kinds of decisions to make about my life before I needed to make those decisions. And we did a lot of work with my hands because I do so much keyboarding. And I remember telling Julia, I haven't been able to like scratch my dog's belly, which I love to do. So she helped me, with movements of the hands, even though I wasn't that bad at the time. I think it's really important to start that stuff early because I learned it once and I use it all the time now as I'm progressing. She taught me how to walk, like that kind of duck walk. You remember that, Julia? We walked around the block a lot. And I do that now all the time. And if I would have waited until I would have gotten worse before I learned that, I don't think it would have been as effective. So
what is the duck walk, Julia? What's the duck walk?
It's just really focusing on that heel toe stride and also having a wider base of support when walking.
Okay.
Because most people with Parkinson's tend to kind of do the supermodel or the tightrope walk where the feet are really close together and then the base of support is narrow. So working on that bigger base, working on that bigger lift to the foot and focusing on that heel strike. Because really for Amy early on, she was like most people where, it was just her more affected side that you could see minor changes in. But especially with the hand, if you think what we see often is if it's the non-dominant hand, then people just develop a learned non-use pattern because you just start not doing stuff with that hand because you don't really have to. And so it's important. And that was something that we worked on with her. I remember one of your functional components was scratching your dog's belly with your left hand.
Yeah.
Because I wanted her using her left hands. And I wanted, when we do the functional components, because we did the LSVT Big program together, I wanted to be enjoyable and something that's meaningful. But I wanted it to stick with her that, like, I want you using that left hand.
Yeah. And so like for you, Amy, you're basically, it's no different than getting in the gym and deciding to do a certain exercise. You're building that muscle memory for that walk that now becomes my walk. And that I go and rub the belly with my non-dominant hand and all of those things that you're just kind of building up that memory for before you need it.
Yes, it was all of that and more. I mean, we did a lot of the cognitive work where you count backwards from 100 by sevens as you're walking over things and, a lot of that kind of work. But in addition to all of that physical framework, Julia just explained to me what Parkinson's was. I was so unfamiliar with it. And she just took a lot of the fear away. And she did so in a way that was kind of spanned the sort of medical information and kind of just lifestyle information. There's a lot of spiritual stuff. And she also made it weirdly fun. Like it was fun that first summer. And that was something that I never would have expected or thought of. And again, I think when a big change like that happens to you, when you are about to embark on a transition in your life, which happens to everybody, big and small, regularly, I think it helps to have a framework at the beginning to set up the good choices that you need to make, so you know what you're doing. And that's exactly what that was. And it was kind of like having the whole Davis Finney manual, presented to me by a friend over the course of a month.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just felt so empowered by the end of that session. And I felt a lot of agency. I knew what kinds of questions to even ask the doctor. I didn't have my first appointment with a Parkinson's neurologist until that September. And I knew what to say. I knew what to ask. I knew about the meds. I didn't take the meds until later that year, but I wouldn't have known any of that by researching it on the internet or reading books. So yeah, it was invaluable. It really was.
Uh, Julia, how would you describe the difference between occupational therapy and physical therapy? Because, Amy talks a lot about the physical things that you did. But how would you describe it to somebody who's curious?
Oh, absolutely. And bear in mind, please know that nothing I say is meant to disparage physical therapists in any way. They are my brothers and sisters in this fight. So I think that the biggest, definition is, as occupational therapists, we consider ours to be one of the first holistic medical professions. So we really look at the whole person, and central to that whole person is you, the person in it. So it's not, for me as an OT, it's never about the disease someone has. It's about the person who's living with that condition. And so I really want to take in, we look at factors about a person's environment, themselves, their occupation. So I want to know everything I can. Like I got to know with, Amy about her profession, about her children, about her family. Like I got to know that she loves to travel, that she likes to hike, she likes to be outdoors. So it's like, what I want to do is look at any potential or even perceived barriers that could be there for someone in addressing those occupations. And for those of you that don't understand, because it's kind of an archaic word, when we use the word occupation, we're not just meaning paid work, but basically anything in your day that you want or need to do. Sleep, eating, getting dressed, having sex, those are all occupations. Basically anything someone wants or needs to do is an occupation. And an occupational therapist is going to look at, are there environmental barriers? Are there personal barriers? Is there anything that is holding you back from doing the things that you want or need to do? And when you work with someone newly diagnosed, I almost feel like I have to kind of look in my crystal ball a little bit and think about, what are the things this person does or that are meaningful to them that might be impacted by their Parkinson's over time. And so then trying to make sure that you empower and give someone the skills and strategies and resources so that they can manage that as that may come over time. Of course, we don't really know, what's down the pike, but I think that arming someone, and just like when she said empowerment, it's like, my heart fluttered, because that's it. I really want people. I used to always say, you have Parkinson's. I don't want you to ever feel like Parkinson's has you. Mm-hmm. So that's the important thing, is like where, and everybody's different with that. I had some patients that really needed to connect more with family. I've seen people move cross country to be closer to their children. Some people need to get involved with the WPC, like Amy, or really feel like they're involved in some causes. It's like everyone, I think, has a different way that they need to kind of hold that space and be present. Like when you guys came to town for the Victory Summit here, I think that was 2017. I don't even remember 2018. And I love that. Like, I think 90% of the volunteers were my PD self graduates. So it was all people that were newly diagnosed in the community that, and that's it. They want to give back. So yeah. I love her story so much.
It sounds like a concierge service, but this is fully covered by my insurance.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah. I know everyone's going to want to know that. So you mentioned getting to know her family. Can you talk a little bit about, Amy, what that meant and how you brought Julia into your family life?
Right. So, nobody knows how to tell their children, right? And so Julia helped me figure that out.
And how your kids were in middle school, right?
They were in middle school. So they were, 12, 13, 11.
I think like 11 and 13 or 12 and 13. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They were pretty self-absorbed. So that was a good age, actually.
How'd you do it?
I think it's important to lead by example. And I was able, again, I don't mean to say that Julia did everything for me, but she kind of did, right? Because of her, I could talk about it calmly and with an understanding of what it meant for my future. And so when I told my daughters, I did it calmly with an understanding of what it was going to do for our future. And then I think that set an example for them to sort of recognize that, okay, this isn't horrific right now, and that helped a lot. The other thing that Julia did was she invited them into a session, one of my sessions. And I remember that she did that in a very careful way to make sure that there were no other patients there that day who had advanced symptoms so that they would scare my daughters.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it was like, we arranged for it to happen on a Friday afternoon or something. And they came in and she put them through all the things that she was putting me through, like the counting backwards by 7, the things with the fans, all the weird stuff. She had me jumping and stretching and stuff like that, and the walking. And they had a good time, and they saw her laughing, they saw me laughing, and they were good with that. And again, that set the stage for them to sort of not freak out at the beginning. Yeah.
What a gift. Wow.
It was a gift. Yeah.
And she showed off at her show off. And there were a lot of things, you guys. I mean, like that.
I would say there would be things that were tough for your girls to do, like going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough for them.
She was a master of the bow suit by the time we brought them in.
Oh, yeah,
and I mean, it was impressive. They were just like, whoa, they're like soccer stars, 12-year-old soccer stars. I'm like, look at mom.
Right.
Yeah, I get competitive.
So you
it's not obviously it's not all fun and roses. I mean, it's getting much harder now for me. It's 7.5 years in. I'm starting to reach the point where the medication is not as effective. I am, I'm starting to have sort of pain all the time, internal tremor all the time. It's hard to manage. So I don't want to make it sound like it's all sunny. Of course it's not. It's hard. But I wanted to have Julia talk with me on this because the occupational therapy is something that I never would have found on my own. You know? And it was
you might,
really
yeah.
great.
So is it something that you've continued to do throughout the 7 years?
I haven't actually. I mean, we talked about this recently, and we said it maybe I should go in for a little bit of a tune-up, but I haven't. I learned a lot. I learned functional stuff that I can do on my own, and I remembered it all because it was a time period in my life where I was laser focused. So I learned how to get out of a car the right way before I needed to know that. Learned how to walk. I learned a lot about my voice. I learned I learned how to talk to other people about it too, which was really helpful.
Yeah.
And the other thing that she did is she introduced me to other people in the community. So sort of, and I think that's another benefit of newly diagnosed people going to see PTs and OTs is they're going to know other people who they can match you with. I know somebody who's maybe like a few years down the road, down your journey as you are, but you present with the same kind of symptoms, you have the same kind of job, the same kind of, you're about the same age. Why don't you talk to them? And that was really helpful too. I did go to a couple of support groups at the beginning, but as everyone says, it's sometimes hard to find your squad in those support groups because everybody's at a different stage. So just having someone or 2 or 3 people who are at the same place in your journey has been very helpful.
Yeah. And in this case, mostly local-ish, because that's the person they're seeing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're all local.
Yeah, and I remember even I paired you up because Amy had a lot of questions like most people do about the medications. And, especially at that time, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but there were a lot of kind of myths and urban legends about dopamine and about the Parkinson's meds. And so I wanted her to be able to ask someone on the medications, and talk to them. Cause I was like, it's one thing for me to tell you they do X, Y, or Z, but I'm not on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I connected her with a great person in our community. He agreed, like, sure, I'd, love to talk to her because that way she could get her questions answered by someone that I knew he wasn't glory about the medications. Like they're wonderful. He'd had ups and downs. I think he had a very realistic perspective of what they do and don't do. And I felt like was able to really be a great kind of resource for Amy. So I think that's important too. Like you're saying, it's not, and support groups, I always try to match someone with the best support group for them, but support groups aren't for everyone, you know, and I acknowledge that. Sometimes you just kind of need to more make some connections and get your questions.
Yeah. And so what was you said you didn't take meds until, I guess, several months after your diagnosis, or a year?
I started taking meds at the end of that year. So from June to November or December. Mm-hmm. And I started with Azaduline and very small amount of the agonist. And I started on the carbidopa levodopa, but probably the following year. Again, very small dose, and just ratcheted up as we go.
How did you react to them?
I was so scared of them, Mel. I had never been a pharmaceutical type of person. I don't think I'd ever taken one other than like an antibiotic. And I knew that I had a really delicate and reactive constitution, which I now know is a lot of that has to do with Parkinson's. So I just assumed that I would have terrible reactions to the meds. I was very nervous. But they actually worked well. I haven't really had any problems with them. I got up to an unreasonably high level on the agonist, and then I went off it completely. So I'm not on that anymore. And that was fun while it lasted. But for all the things that the agonist does in terms of improving your mood and making you hyperproductive and the relentless creative pursuits, which I had all of that happening. It does reach a point where cumulatively you start to bomb out in your executive functioning. And so I was on it for about 5 years, and then I went off, and that was hard going off it. But I have been off it for about 6 months now, and I think I get confused sometimes with the pandemic, what year this is.
It was 6 months. No, it was 8.
I think it was 3 years. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So right now I'm just on straight carbidopa.
Okay.
I mean, a lot more than I was before, but that's what I'm on now. And I'm open to other things as they become necessary.
Have you looked into DBS or?
I have it on the back burner. I haven't looked into it personally yet, but I'm not shying away from it either. I'm learning about it, and I'm preparing for it, I guess, for the future. Mm-hmm. But it's not in my immediate future in the next year or so.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that you do, every day to live well? I mean, you're working full time. You've got 2 adult children. What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has their own recipe, and they know what works for them the best, and they tweak that recipe all the time, right? My recipe has, I want to say, like 3 pieces to it. The first piece is all the things, the lifestyle things. I do exercise every day. I do watch my diet. I pay attention to the kinds of foods that I feel better on versus worse on. I do pay attention to the sleep. Going off the agonist was actually the thing that helped me recover my sleep the most. I don't know if that happens to everybody, but personally for me, that was the thing. And I pay attention to the breaks that your brain needs to have, whether it's meditation or breathing exercises or prayer. I do pay attention to all that stuff. I do all the things that you're supposed to do. That's number 1. Number 2, I really find a lot of inspiration in other people, not just people who I know. And of course, all of the Davis Finney ambassadors are so inspiring with all of their projects and all the things that they're doing and their attitudes. I just, I find them to be so inspiring. But I have this weird thing that I do, and that's that I think about when I have to do something hard, or I don't think I'm going to be able to get up and like teach class or something. I don't think I can do it. I think about FDR because I very recently watched Ken Burns' documentary on the Roosevelts, and I hadn't realized what polio had done to him. And I hadn't realized that he was this really strapping, athletic, vigorous person in his 30s when he got polio. And he went from that to never being able to stand on his own ever again, never being able to walk. It was devastating, and it was chronically painful. And he took about a year. I mean, this documentary is amazing. He took about a year to go inside and figure out things. And then after that, he became president. And so I'm like, I'm not comparing myself to FDR, but sometimes when I'm feeling really, really shaky and unprepared to face the world, I think if FDR can run for president without being able to stand on his own 2 feet, I can probably go grocery shopping right now. And it's not just him, but I find inspiring people all the time who are dealing with really hard things and living their lives anyway. And to me, that's part of my recipe for getting up and showing up, and inevitably it turns out to be okay. It's almost like the anticipation of the thing is worse than the thing. So getting through the anticipation of the thing is the hardest work. And the third thing that I do is I still do a lot of magical thinking, a good amount of magical thinking. Along the lines of this, there's so much that everybody still doesn't know about Parkinson's, its causes and its mechanisms. And so I choose to focus on the unknown, and maybe there's something that's going to help, right? And so I kind of give the Parkinson's the hand, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna think about that hard stuff. I'm gonna be Scarlett O'Hara. I'm gonna think about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Crazy. And today I'm just gonna pretend like maybe this new tea that I'm drinking might be helpful. Maybe the acupuncture might work. Maybe this exogenous ketones that I've been taking, I'm realistic, and I read a lot of stuff, and I keep myself informed. I know intellectually the progression and how it gets difficult, but I think that I am able to function better, and I'm able to. It helps me get through my day to just live in my imagination sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not psychologically healthy, but whatever gets you through is what I say. Whatever gets you through the night was my parenting philosophy.
Uh-huh.
And
That's
whatever gets you through the day is my Parkinson's management philosophy too.
Oh, I love it. You said that you guys did LSVT Loud together.
Big.
Yeah. Okay, so
LSVT
can you tell everybody what that is and how it went for you? I want to hear, Amy, and if it's stuff that you still sort of use in your toolbox.
Amy, do you want me to describe it, or do you want to describe it?
Yeah, Julia, you describe it.
Okay, sure. So LSVT Big is a structured protocol of 7 standard exercises and 5 functional component tasks, 3 hierarchy tasks, and big walking. The whole idea behind the program is that you're applying the concept of amplitude to your movements to override hypokinesia and bradykinesia, so the small movements and the slow movements. So in those exercises, even though it is a standardized protocol, for example, what Amy did, being young onset, like super healthy and active, she was on balance beams. She talked about the fans. We had flip fans. We did cognitive dual tasking. I BOSU. I challenged her, out the yin yang, where I might have someone else who is seated for the entire protocol, and that's how they do it. So it really does help you. The exercises help you understand how to apply amplitude into your movement with basic movements like a forward step, a side step, a back back step, things that you have to do every day. The functional components are meant to really personalize it. So like scratching her dog's belly, maybe it's handwriting or buttoning your shirt, or, bringing a fork to your mouth, whatever is important and meaningful to you. So then you learn to apply use of that amplitude into your daily activities, so that it's not just performing an exercise program, it's really learning how to move in a way that is functional, effective, and efficient with Parkinson's.
Great.
Yeah, and I definitely use that concept all the time. The word amplitude is something that I think about a lot. So when I talk about walking like a duck with Julia, I mean, we were walking around the block and swinging our arms like this, and our making sure that my heels, dug in, and I was taking huge steps, and I do that when it feels like my body is, encasing me, and I can't, like a cocoon, and I can't move. I start doing that stuff, and it helps a lot.
Absolutely.
Is your hand, is it dystonia or carpal tunnel or what?
It's neither one of those. It's a tendonitis, like a really common tendonitis. I forget what it's called now. It starts with a D. It runs right through the thumb bone, and it's really hard. It takes a really long time to heal, and it's super painful. That's one thing I found is I'm getting a lot of tendonitis issues that I probably would have had anyway, but the Parkinson's exacerbates them, and it makes the healing process a lot longer. So, I wear this guy everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Julia, is that something that you notice with your clients?
Yeah, rigidity definitely, and stiffness. I think that a lot of times it puts more stress on the joints, because the muscles are more locked up. And so then we're really forcing sometimes through the joints. So that's where, I encourage people always to continue to work with physical and occupational therapy to make sure that, if there might be some basic exercises that you can do to help with that stiffness or rigidity. I have seen people get some pretty significant injuries, if not like, there was a person I knew at one point that was doing some, trapeze work and like boxing, and then, tore their rotator cuff. Well, obviously there was some instability going on there, right? And that's something that, not that the PT is going to necessarily tell you not to do things, but maybe what it feels like when you stabilize properly through that joint and protect that joint. So I think even with aging, we all still need that. But, with Parkinson's, that adds on to it. And keep in mind, you guys, I want to be really, really clear. I don't want to make it that you just go to some PT or OT and you'll have this magical relationship. I think that just like all things, you have to find the person that fits for you. And sometimes you have to kiss a few frogs to find a prince. So you might find some therapist out there that you go to. And, I've heard terrible things, just like with doctors, where it's like, oh, you'll never be able to do this, that, or the other again, or, very limiting language sometimes, especially I think if you see maybe an orthopedic focused therapist versus a neurologic focused therapist, where they're thinking about, well, you just can't get better, because they're used to seeing a hip replacement or a stroke that gets better. They're not used to seeing things that are considered to be progressive. So I think remember that when you're on the look, look to your community, look to your ambassadors, look to the Finney Foundation if they have recommendations, go to support groups, go to exercise groups, and consider yourself a consumer. It's your dollar, it's your time. You have the right to find the person that fits for you. If there's something about that therapist that doesn't fit, maybe ask them, do you have someone else in your practice that's more this, or I really wanted to focus on yoga, or, whatever. Do you have someone in the community? So I think don't hesitate to advocate for yourself, because what we do see a lot in therapy is, and in exercise and activity, it being meaningful and relevant to you is actually the secret sauce. Like, for example, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like, I hate stationary cycling. My husband loves it. Those classes are 4.5 days long. I'm convinced it's only 45 minutes, but somehow, I mean, it's like, and I come out and my butt feels horrible, and I hate it. But I like dance-based fitness. My husband would rather be shot than do that. I think remember that even if something might be the best, I get asked that a lot about what's the best exercise for Parkinson's. The best is when you're going to show up and do, and that you feel good after, and that you're safe doing, and that it gives you, the feeling that you want from that activity. So you guys all advocate for yourself, be a consumer, and demand what you want.
Right. Absolutely.
You deserve it.
So how did you tell your work right away, Amy, and how did it go?
I did. I'm one of those rare people who told my work right away. Told you I was diagnosed on a Friday. I told my boss that Monday.
Mm.
And I did that for a couple of reasons. One is I'm just terrible at keeping secrets. There's just no way I'd be able to keep that secret at all. And the other thing is, I work in an academic setting. It was June. They were putting the schedule together for the fall about who was going to teach what. I felt like I needed to let them know. I didn't know if I was going to still be able to teach. And so I felt like I needed to let them know that. And the third reason is I just work with really nice people. I'm very lucky. And the dean was the person who I had to tell, and he was a friend, and it was hard, but I felt like I was with a friend when I disclosed. And I just told everybody at work, and everyone has been very, very supportive. I think that being in an academic setting makes that a little easier for people. I've said this before, that I think it's more difficult to disclose, and for the employer to accommodate in different kinds of jobs and different kinds of sectors. And obviously, if you're someone who works in a setting where, your Parkinson's is going to make it unsafe for others, that's not going to, your job's not going to be protected in that situation. But in academic setting, it's a little easier. So I did. Yeah, I did. I've since spoken to a lot of people who are struggling with whether to disclose, and it's a very individual decision. It's very difficult, as everyone has pointed out, because once you disclose, you are treated differently. It doesn't, the laws protect certain things. It's not a blanket protection. And it certainly doesn't protect the way that you are perceived by others in the workplace in terms of competitiveness, productivity, weakness, So those are all things that are very individual, and it helps to talk to somebody about it and talk through it, because once you disclose, you can't go back, right? That's like you're drawing the line in the sand there, and you have to know what to do when you disclose. Like, who do you have to tell, and what do you have to say in order to protect yourself as best as possible? So yeah, that's a difficult one.
Mm-hmm. What has changed about your work or career path or thoughts over the last 7 years?
It's a lot. I said this before. It's a lot harder. I'm starting to feel. I do a lot of keyboarding. I'm a writing professor, right? So I'm on the keyboard many, many hours, either doing my own writing or grading others, and that's just so hard. I can't handwrite anything anymore. My handwriting is shot, and it's harder for me to type. And it's hard for me to teach because of the voice thing. And cognitively, I'm starting to sort of lose some words. So, I see myself transitioning into a new stage. I am grateful that I have a job to go to. I'm grateful that I'm able to continue to help support, and to, there's a lot of responsibilities that I'm grateful that I'm still able to manage. But yeah, it's a day-to-day thing, and that's why I think of FDR all the time. Like, what?
Yeah.
I could be the president.
Right. You wrote a piece for us a couple of years ago, I want to say, about sort of how you approach life now, and what are some of the things that you started doing differently, whether with your family or your own time or anything like that.
Right. So this is where I turn into a big cliche, right? And I think the cliches are cliches for a reason. They resonate, right? I think when people say that Parkinson's is a gift, some people get angry when they hear that, but I think what they mean is that it forces things on you that you wouldn't otherwise undertake if you didn't have this change imposed on you. The things that it forces on you, it forces you to let go of a lot of your past identity, a lot of the things that you are hoping for your future, a lot of hopes and dreams. That is so hard to do or to even think about doing unless it's forced on you. Once it's forced on you, it becomes a little, it feels like freedom sometimes. And, it feels like stripping away things that are not important that I never would have done if I wasn't forced to do that. I think you called it discernment in an earlier webinar. And when you start, when the veil is lifted and you sort of start thinking about your life and what does it mean to have a life well lived? Like, what's the end game here anyway? It's to me, it's that, that you're loved and you share love, that you do a little bit of good in this world, that you create something, you help raise a child, you take care of an animal or two, you experience, awe and wonder every once in a while, you get a few laughs. I have all that, It's like, what am I grieving? I think what I find myself grieving is my imaginary life, the life that I imagine that I would have had without Parkinson's. But that's not something that I've lost, because that's not a life that I was guaranteed to have anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about that, I think, well, that's a waste of my energy. So let's just focus on what I've got. And I've got all the things, and I think that's the gift, is it forces you to simplify. And it's definitely not easy, but, I've been intentionally training my brain and using sort of the limited units of energy you have during a day. If I find myself using energy in a gas guzzling way, just a dirty energy, like a waste of energy, like grieving an Instagram life that I never would have been promised anyway, force myself back and to clean energy, just be grateful for what I have. And what is it that you want anyway? Everything that I would have identified as wanting, I have. And so, but I work on that. And but what's interesting is the more I work on that, the more effective it is. It's like training anything. It's like practicing with anything. So that my days sometimes are hard, but I've decided at the beginning that I wasn't going to let that external difficulty dictate how I felt, that I was going to choose how I felt, and despite of any external difficulties, right? And so that's the cliche, like that's, those are the memes that you see all the time, but they actually work. And for me anyway, that's what works for me.
I love it. That's a perfect way to end. I'm so grateful to both of you for being here today. Julie, it was really fun to see you and catch up again, and to see your face, Amy. I love it. And I'm just so grateful for everything you have to share with this community.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you very soon.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me.